It's very good to be back at Abhayagiri. Some of you I don't know, many of you are old friends. It's really good to see everyone. And I guess it was only a few hours ago, but I had no idea I'd be giving the Vesak talk. But this is how it works. You get asked, and anyway, so you say yes, and you give the talk. So, it's been mentioned before, today is Vesak, and in the Theravada Buddhist lunar calendar, there are 3 major traditional holidays. And Vesak is the full moon of May. It's a bit strange, it's in June this year, due to oddities of the calendar. And Vesak is Buddha Day, celebrating the Buddha's birth, full awakening, and parinibbana. Then Asala Puja is typically the full moon of July. That's Dhamma Day, celebrating the first teaching at Varanasi to the 5 disciples. And then the full moon of February is Magha Puja, that's Sangha Day, celebrating the spontaneous gathering of 1,250 Arahant disciples and the giving of the Awada Patimokkha. So, Buddha Day. And so on these days, every 2 weeks there's a Patimokkha ceremony where this time Ajahn Chunda recited the Patimokkha, which is pretty impressive given that he's acting abbot right now and extraordinarily busy. He took the time to chant Patimokkha and all the practice that takes. And then we listened to a short Awada by Lumpur Pasano, which was very inspiring. And so, I thought to talk about similar themes. So, Buddha Day. Lumpur, this day celebrates the birth, the full awakening, and the parinibbana of the Buddha. So, Lumpur pointed out that the Buddha was born like all of us have been born, faced the same challenges of having a human body and a human mind. And the Buddha died like all of us will die, faced the same challenges of growing old. He lived to 80 years old. But in the middle of that, he did something very extraordinary, which was awakening. And in a way, that awakening is the central point of Buddhism. If the Buddha hadn't awakened, there would be no Buddhism. That's what brings us here. So, that the crux of it, what is that awakening? I guess to set the context, I think probably I was reflecting earlier that right now our culture is, what should we say, doesn't really have a sense of meaning. If you read the newspapers, you get there's absolutely no direction or meaning. It's all news. And, this happens, that disaster, that other disaster, maybe a good thing once in a while, but nothing telling you this is what a meaningful life could be. Just doesn't, the newspapers never say that. Or at least very rarely. And if they do, it's not unified. Some people have all sorts of different opinions about it, and our society doesn't agree and doesn't even really want to agree. And so for those of us who live in this, it's confusing. So the Buddha's awakening provides direction if that's what we want to. It's a way you can potentially orient your life around that. The Buddha called his path a noble path, and so seeking that awakening is noble, both bringing you beyond the world, and it's what you do is all good actions. But first, looking more at that awakening, I think the Buddha, there's a simile where the Buddha was born in the world, grew up in the world, but then went beyond the world. Just like a lotus lotuses begin in the mud at the bottom of a pond, and then they grow up through the water, some of them come out of the water fully, and then you have a beautiful flower that, although it began in the water, is now blooming above it. And Chithurst has a lotus pond, which is, you can witness this for yourself if you go there. And so the Buddha was born in the world, grew up in the world, and went beyond the world. And this has to do with going beyond the world doesn't mean attaining a special state of mind. Because the Buddha, in his analysis, described the potential realm of things we can imagine try to be. These called the 5 aggregates. So form, the material form of the body, feeling, positive, pleasant and unpleasant and neutral, feeling tones, perception, the whole realm of what we look at, how we perceive the world. Just when something comes up, recognizing, oh, that's a deer, or that's a car, or that's so-and-so and she's like that. This is all perception. And mental formations, the habits, patterns, the choices we make, and consciousness, just raw experience of sense data. There's an experience of what it's like, what red is like, is consciousness. You can't really, if you're colorblind, you don't know what red is like. You don't experience that aspect of consciousness. It's perhaps the most subtle and not describable. And the Buddha suggests that everything we cling to, everything we take to be ourself, falls in that. And if you think about, we have this wish, this is the whole scope of body and mind. And so much of our life is spent thinking, may my body and mind be like this and not like that. Or may other people's bodies and minds be like this and not like that. That's our life. And certainly the newspapers don't know anything other than that. And the Buddha said, you don't find liberation there. That whole realm is unsatisfactory and can't be other than that. And this is something we can verify. We can verify for ourselves. I think there's we often learn this pretty early on. Ajahn Amaro tells a story where when he was a child, there was some toy in a toy store, and he told his mom very genuinely, "Mom, if I had that toy, I'd never want anything else again." And the way he describes it, he totally believed that. It really seemed real to him. And so his family was poor, so there was no guarantee that they'd be able to buy the toy. But I think it was Christmas or a birthday or something, and the toy showed up. And boy, Ajahn Amaro, Jeremy Horner, then was happy. And then I think a couple days later, he started to complain to his mom about something like, "Mom, I'm bored," or whatever. That's what I said to my mom. I don't know what. But then his mom pointed out, "Well, you got that toy, right? And now you're unhappy? So what's going on there?" And young Jeremy thought, she is right. I did think that. And I was wrong. And that's a major awakening. Oh, what I thought was satisfactory, what you really believe was satisfactory, isn't. And that's on the level of, a child's toy. But how often does that happen to adults? We think, oh, when I get that, I'll really be happy. And that never does it. And the Buddha points this out and says, you can do better. And I think the modern world, generally tries to distract us from that. Just keep, or says the best you can do is find a series of that's, none of which will be satisfactory. And so, it's always challenging to try to describe a fully awakened being. But at the same time, if you don't try, then you may not be sufficiently inspired to practice with as much diligence as the practice deserves. So hence we try to talk about awakened beings, not because you can actually, again, you can make mistakes, but one mistake is not to. And then you find other things to do with your time other than practice Dhamma. So, as I understand the awakening of, the awakening, it's a profound shift of identity away from. One has more or less the same experience of body and mind, but one knows that isn't me, and there isn't a me beyond that either. It's not like you find another kind of body or mind. There are lots and lots of refined mental states that are possible, and no mental state is awakening. But mental states are all contained in those khandhas. And it's Ajahn Chah called Nibbana the reality of non-grasping. That letting go. And I think this is helpful when one looks at the passing away of the Buddha, which is the third part of this. And we typically, devout Buddhists usually won't say the Buddha died. They'll say he realized parinibbana. And that's not just towing a party line. There's some wisdom there. Because most of us, the aggregates definitely stopped, just like everybody else. But most of us identify with those aggregates, with this body and mind that we experience, and the Buddha didn't. And I can't remember exactly who the discussion occurred, but there was one disciple of the Buddha, I think it may have been Sariputta who spoke to him about this, who came up with the view, as I understand the Buddha's teachings, a fully awakened being, a Tathagata, does not exist after the death of the body. And so I'll just assume it's Sariputta, my best memory. And so I guess the monks say, well, this is a wrong view. Let's get Sariputta to talk this misguided monk out of it. So they do. And Sariputta begins by asking this monk, do you regard the Tathagata as form? Basically, do you think the awakened quality of the Buddha is form? The physical body? And of course not. Is it feeling? The tones of sensation? No, that's certainly not the Buddha. That's not why you follow this, this master. Ditto with perception, mental formations, and consciousness. This monk said, no, I can't, you can't find the Buddha in those. And then the question is, well, what about all of them together? And that might have been a bit more, but this monk, even misguided as he was, still had some wisdom. He said, after pondering, he said, no, taking them all together, you can't find the Buddha there either. That's not awake. That's not what I regard as the Buddha. And then Sariputta continued, well, what about, so can you find the Buddha apart from those? I said, well, no, I've certainly, there's no way I could talk to the Buddha without those going on, and no way I could even conceive of the Buddha without them. So Sariputta then said, well, if you cannot find the Tathagata here and now, how in the world can you say that the Tathagata ceases to exist after death? And that's a strong argument. The monk changed his view. And what we cling to defines us. Cling to nothing, and one is defined by nothing. And that's not an annihilation, according to the Buddha. It is massive freedom. The sort of freedom that we really want. The sort of freedom that doesn't change. The sort of freedom that we practice Dhamma to reach for. And it's also not a detachment, it's not a disengagement from the world. When the heart is free, there's nothing pulling on it, and it can actually attend to the world in a much freer way, in a much more open way, and in a much more compassionate way. My understanding is once one drops all that suffering, one realizes just how badly everybody else is suffering. And that's motivation. My understanding, I have heard the story where at Longta Mahabua was meeting with a group of Western monks, possibly I think they were from Wat Pah Nanachat. And, Westerners, some of Westerners are willing to ask questions that most Thais wouldn't dare. So someone asked Longta, what is the experience of an enlightened being? And Longta, only compassion. And he was regarded as one of the fiercest monks in Thailand. But that was his response, compassion. And that was people's impression of the Buddha. But more in the Mahayana tradition, goes as, the compassionate Buddha is usually an epithet. But even in our chanting, Buddho Sasudo Karuniko Mahakar. And so the Buddha absolutely pure with ocean-like compassion. Both that absolute freedom from any sort of stickiness, and a compassion that is very hard to fathom. That's awakening. And so with this, it's very helpful. I think it's helpful to ponder this and to let the heart be inspired by this, because it's really useful to be inspired. If we're not inspired, we won't put forth effort. And the Buddha explained it. Well, the Buddha certainly put forth effort himself, and he said there aren't shortcuts. You have to work. We have to be willing to give up things that hinder us and cultivate qualities and cultivate wholesome qualities to replace them. This is the cultivation of the Noble Eightfold Path. But however, cultivating the Noble Eightfold Path is an inspiring way to live. And it's noble. People who dedicate their lives to that are noble people. They're aspiring to something that is worth aspiring to. And as I mentioned, their actions, you aim to harm no one. One thing you notice in the Buddha's teachings is that the Buddha is always aiming at actions of body, speech, and mind that benefit everyone. If it doesn't benefit everyone, the Buddha suggests, well, keep looking. There may be something more skillful. Look for it. So this is, and it's good to recollect the people who we know who are further along on this path than us, and we can see the results in their lives. I certainly, for me, I can remember when I was a physics graduate student, I had a very good graduate advisor. If I hadn't had such a good graduate advisor, I wouldn't have finished my PhD. But John Clark was really much better than most professors at mentoring graduate students. And he really cared about us. He was rather disappointed when I told him I was not going to continue physics. But I was also coming up here to Abhayagiri Monastery, and so I had contact with both Ajahn Kaccana and Ajahn Amaro. And as I ponder, as I spent time both in the physics lab and up here, I realized that while I had immense respect for my research advisor, Professor John Clark, I wanted to be Ajahn Kaccana. And so it's like, no question there. I follow him. There's just a total, real difference. So I'm here. And I don't regret it. I think I probably would end up, I couldn't even apply for a postdoc simply for the simple reason I did not want to be a postdoc. And that's the first thing. If you're going to continue in research, you have to want it. Otherwise, it won't work at all. But I wanted this. This is what I was inspired by. So we come here and reflect on, we come here, we reflect on this, can recollect the Buddha and our teachers. And just, how this, it's really helpful to get a sense of how this feels in the heart, what this inspiration feels like. Sada in Pali, faith is one word for it. But this is not the faith that asks you to believe in things that are either impossible or improbable. When you come to understand sort of the structure of the Buddha's awakening, it seems, well, that seems plausible. And then when you meet people who to a greater or lesser degree seem to exemplify that, you think, wow, they're special. And they say this worked for them. Take note of that. This is possible. And that's faith. And in the process of awakening, particularly for the first stage, the most important qualities, at least according to Anya. And one of the teachings of Lumpur Pasano that I appreciate is realize that you should let go. But that isn't enough. It's faith that actually finally lets go. Buddha suggested, unsatisfactory. And so let it go, drop that attachment and see what happens. And that's something we haven't done before. And Panya sits there calculating, thinking, well, should I do it? Should I not do it? Do it? Not do it? Not sure. And faith says, well, yeah, I trust I'll do it. But probably not in words at that point, just does. So particularly for us Westerners who are much more, well, some of us are here Westerners, are much more calculating types. It's really helpful to learn how to cultivate faith in order to balance that. And when these faculties are in balance, then Dhamma practice can go smoothly. So I offer this for your reflection tonight.